Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to What Is Next. I'm Mark Halperin, editor-in-chief at Two-Way, and so happy to have you here. We're happy and grateful. We're a new program, and we're off to a pretty quick start because of you, those of you who've listened previously or watched previously. We're now the number 4 top podcast, new podcast according to the Associated Press and Apple, and we're the top new news in the news category. And again, we couldn't be more grateful to you as we start out here. So thank you for being part of it. And again, you can watch us on YouTube and you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, as they say. Today, also grateful to have Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA here to join us to talk about everything MAGA and what's going on in the country. Great guy, appear on his program regularly, and he's returning the favor today. And Meghan McCain will be here. And Meghan and I are colleagues at Two-Way. Meghan has a great interest in the topic we're going to spend some of our time talking about today, which is this issue of Joe Biden's cognitive decline and how that story was allowed to play out the way it did. Meghan has known the Biden family for years, and she knows Jake Tapper, the reporter who's one of the two who wrote the new book that's being discussed elsewhere in a year. She knows them both well, and she's got strong feelings about it. So Meghan will be here to talk about that. We're going to talk about Joe Biden and this issue of cognitive decline. And I know a lot of people are going to say, why not talk about Donald Trump and all the controversies involving Donald Trump? Those are important and interesting too, and they're discussed elsewhere, and I'll continue to hold the Trump administration accountable and to cover that. But the reason why I'm continuing to talk about this story about Joe Biden is because there's no way to hold Donald Trump accountable if two institutions in this country aren't capable of doing it, because they don't have the credibility. That's the media, my colleagues in the media, and that's the Democratic Party. Every one of you should want those two institutions to have credibility, even if you don't like the Democrats. And we know that those two organizations don't have credibility. That's true for a lot of reasons with a lot of people. The media is probably at an all-time low in terms of lack of credibility. And there's a new Associated Press poll out this week that shows people not particularly optimistic, including Democrats, about the future of that party. Democrats don't have no credibility, but they don't have enough. And that's part of why Donald Trump is not held accountable the way he should be. And so now's the time, with this new book coming out next week, to use it as an opportunity not to engage in whitewashes, not to engage in the same kind of lack of truth that existed during this entire saga of the question of Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Now is the time to get people in my business to recognize there's a credibility problem, and for Democrats to do it also. The reason I spend so much time talking about this is I care about the media, and I want there to be two strong political parties in the country. And most of the people trying to hold the media accountable for the biggest media scandal in American history, as I call it, are on the right. Jason Miller, who works for President Trump, he tweets about this all the time. He highlights the lack of credibility on this issue. There are other people on the right who do it. That's not good enough, okay? Byron York, very smart guy, writes for the conservative Washington Examiner. He wrote this morning in his newsletter on this issue of the press's dealing with their failures on Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Understanding the press's handling of then-President Joe Biden's obvious physical and mental infirmity is probably more a matter for psychologists than for media and analysts. There's some truth to that, because understanding why the media not only failed before but continues to fail, I think does involve a lot about human nature and psychology. I'm no expert in those areas, but I do know a fair amount about the media, so we'll talk about that. Eric Erickson, another person on the right, he wrote in his newsletter, now that Joe Biden has lost, the truth can be told except for the part of the press's own complicity in the cover-up. I couldn't agree more. The people in the media now who are writing about this book are ignoring the media's own role in it, and that's a vital part of what happened, and it's extremely important. Eric writes also, had Joe Biden somehow gotten reelected, the press would right now still deny his decline. I think that's true. It's an incredible statement, but I think it's true. And if Fox News had treated a Republican president's decline the way MSNBC treated Biden's, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Brian Stelter, who writes for CNN about the media, and Oliver Darcy, who writes his own media newsletter, and the rest of the media's appointed accountability voices would demand accountability. But the press will give MSNBC a pass because progressives will protect progressives. That's the view on the right, that the media is still covering up their failures in exposing what was obviously true to the tens of millions of people in the country, because they wanted to protect, as my psychologist had, they wanted to protect Joe Biden because they didn't want to help Donald Trump win, and because They are just in general biased towards Democrats, and in part because they were threatened by the Biden White House and the Biden campaign that they shouldn't write about this or talk about it. Okay. The press is failing again. They failed on this story. They fail on a lot of stories related to Donald Trump, too. But I'm talking about this one because right now it's an opportunity that's being missed. Read anything, New York Times, Washington Post, watch cable news on the liberal networks. They're not talking with accountability about the press's failure. What's happening now is not just a failure of Jake Tapper. We'll talk about Jake Tapper because he wrote the book or co-wrote the book. But he's representative of the entire mindset of my colleagues, which is to blame Joe Biden for what happened and to blame other Democrats for not speaking out. There's a few Democrats like Ro Khanna, the congressman from California, who's being honest and saying, look, I didn't see a lot of in private of Joe Biden, the decline, but it was obvious. And the party should have insisted that he step down and not be the candidate earlier than they did. But he's a pretty rare exception. So you've got the Democrats, or the media rather, blaming Joe Biden and the Democrats for being silent. And you've got the Democrats, the elected officials, for the most part, blaming Joe Biden. He shouldn't have run. He shouldn't have covered up his decline. And then you've got the Biden team blaming the press and the Democrats, right? So it's a circle of blame. And I know it's human nature. When you've done something wrong or you're being accused of doing something wrong, what a lot of people do is rather than say, you know what, let me be introspective. Let me think, is this true? Maybe I need to do a hard thing and admit not just a single failure, but years of systematic failure. But human nature for a lot of people is, let me blame someone else. So the press blames the Democrats and Biden. The Democrat office holders blame Biden. And Biden blames the press and the Democrats. When you're blaming others, you're not being reflective. What I'm asking now is for Democrats to be reflective. But more so, I'm asking people in my profession, or maybe as much, people in my profession need to be reflective. Okay? So let's talk about Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper's position and his publisher's position up until this week was Jake was one of the hard-charging reporters who tried to get to the bottom of Biden's mental acuity decline. Okay? Now, we talked in the previous episode about the ways it was easy to illustrate that wasn't true. He didn't never bring up the topic, but it's clear he was not amongst those determined to get to the bottom of it. The irony is his co-author, Alex Thompson, is one of the few reporters who tried to get to the bottom of it. It seems like Jake Tapper and his PR operation decided that was not a sustainable position because the public record was so clear. And again, I'm singling out Jake Tapper. I could point you to the same kind of narrative about almost anyone who covered the White House for the New York Times or the Washington Post, other reporters for CNN. But the reason we're focusing on Jake Tapper is because Jake Tapper's put out a book purporting to hold Biden accountable and tell the full story of the cover-up. So this week, apparently, he decided, well, maybe he wasn't as hard-charging in trying to tell the public about Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity as he claimed to be. So he's got a new strategy. It's a two-part strategy, and it's not a strategy about accountability, which is what the press needs. The first part of the strategy, okay, is to go from saying, I was on the front lines of exposing all this to maybe I could have done better. Here's Jake Tapper on CNN Wednesday morning announcing his new position that he could have done better.
I think some of the criticism is fair, to be honest, of me. Certainly, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. But knowing then what I know now, I look back at my coverage during the Biden years, and I did cover some of these issues, but not enough. I look back on it with humility.
Okay. Now, here's the second change in Tapper's strategy. He's going to cling to people who did try to hold Joe Biden accountable. One is his co-author, Alex Thompson, who again did, one of the few who had professional risk and criticism from the Biden folks did. So then he decides, I'm going to cling to the folks who did good. The Wall Street Journal wrote one of the few stories during the campaign about Joe Biden's mental decline. I'm not criticizing the story because at least they tried to write the story. It's hilarious, though, the way that story's been built up as some extraordinary effort. It was pretty weak tea, to tell you the truth. It quoted mostly Republicans, not Democrats. And the examples I didn't think were that great compared to what I know and what we could see with our own eyes. So the story should not be criticized. But Jake Tapper also this week, as part of his change in strategy, decided he was going to cling to these Wall Street Journal reporters. And he clung to them so hard he called them heroes.
They're with me now. Two of the heroic reporters were covering this intensely during the Biden years. Annie Linsky and Siobhan Hughes, they are with the Wall Street Journal. They reported on the decline of Biden's mental acuity back in June of last year. The piece then, quote, behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. Participants in meetings said the 81-year-old president performed poorly at times. The White House said Biden is sharp and his critics are playing partisan politics, unquote. This is not the first time you guys have been on. I said it last year before the election, and I'll say it again. The journalism you did was vital, and the smear campaign by Democrats against you two is disgraceful.
So that's Jake Tapper talking about this Wall Street Journal story now, saying that it was a disgrace the way Democrats tried to smear the Wall Street Journal reporters. And he's right about that. There were plenty of Democrats, including ones at senior levels, who knew full well that Joe Biden was evincing mental acuity decline, who attacked the Wall Street Journal story and the reporters and said it was not well reported. It didn't match with their experience with Joe Biden. Again, it's like through the looking glass for me, because no one could take their denial seriously. You didn't need to have private meetings with Joe Biden to see his mental acuity decline. It was on offer many days. He had good days and bad days. So the decline was not as bad as some people said it was, but it was obvious. And it was also obvious from his limited schedule, his failure to do regular press conferences or talk to reporters. So Jake Tapper now says this Wall Street Journal story is amazing. These reporters were heroes, okay? That's not what he said when the story came out, okay? Their story came out in June of 2024, before the debate. And instead of saying they were heroic back then, what did Jake Tapper do in response to that story? He brought on Chris Coons, senator from Delaware, one of Joe Biden's strongest allies in Congress. And he allowed Chris Coons, virtually unchallenged, to attack the Journal story. So the Journal states it was based on interviews with 45 people over months that were either in meetings or briefed on meetings with President Biden. They do note in the article that most of the criticism comes from Republicans, but not all of it. They said that some of the criticism was from Democrats, although they said it, on background or off the record. Have you heard any concerns from anyone who has met with President Biden about him seeming a little slower?
No.
None.
If your core question is President Biden up to the job? Absolutely. Have I heard from some of my colleagues concerns about the character difference between him and Donald Trump? Absolutely. Have I heard concerns about what Donald Trump would do if he were president compared to what Joe Biden has done and would do if reelected? Absolutely. And I don't hear a lot of coverage of the ways in which former President Trump makes very similar slips, mistakes, mishaps, fails to grasp who he's talking to or where he is. There's been a relentless focus in some news outlets on minor slips by our president that I frankly think are typical of anyone who's keeping a demanding 14-hour-a-day schedule.
Okay, so again, you got to give your guest an opportunity to say what he or she wants to say. But if you're someone who really shared the point of view of the heroic Wall Street Journal reporters, I would say you push back a lot harder than that. You don't accept the standard Democratic Biden spin of his mental acuity. You don't accept an attack on the heroes. It's not what he did, okay? So he decided in the wake of their story not to have them on. Now maybe he tried and they refused, but his premise not to have a Republican on to say, well, yeah, that's true. That's what we see. Not to have voters on who believed, whether they were Democrats or not, that Joe Biden suffered mental acuity. His decision back then was to have on one of the President Biden's biggest defenders and let him just, say the story is not true. Okay? Now he's trying to sell the book, right? Now his goal is to say, you can trust me as someone credible to explain the full dimensions of the cover-up of Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Because now that it's safe to book these Wall Street Journal reporters, I'm going to book them on and say they're heroes. Okay, so he has them on the show this week, but he also had them on in July, several days after the debate, after everybody in the country could not turn their eyes away and understood what happened. So doesn't have them on when the story comes out, has on a Biden critic, and then treats their story more seriously after the press decided to turn and say, well, Joe Biden's no longer useful to us. We'll turn to Kamala Harris to try to beat Donald Trump. Okay, so there's a credibility issue. Okay, Jake Tapper is fawning over these Wall Street Journal reporters, acknowledging he should have done more to try to have the credibility to sell his book. So people won't laugh at the notion that someone who was uninterested, patently uninterested in getting to the bottom of Joe Biden's mental acuity decline, to this day, patently uninterested in holding his own network accountable and himself accountable. He says, well, I could have done better. That's a throwaway line. And again, I'd say this about other reporters. At least Jake Tapper's now said he could have done better. Where's the New York Times saying that about this story? This story matters for credibility. We had a commander-in-chief with severe mental acuity decline, no access to his doctor, no access to interview him about his health. And the press just let it happen because they didn't want to help Donald Trump win. Okay? So you can say over and over, like, trust me, I should have done better. Trust me, I'm embracing these Wall Street Journal reporters. But seriously, that is not full accountability. That is not explaining the failure. And then you've got at CNN, this guy, Brian Stelter, who's their media reporter, who's an ally of Jake Tapper to protect Tapper's image, to enhance Tapper's image. He's got a media newsletter. He's supposed to cover the media. Guy doesn't write about the biggest failure in the history of American media. Instead, he writes about how great Tapper's book is. And today in his newsletter, guy's a fan of irony. He writes about how it was so important for Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson to have the truth in their book, the full truth, that they hired the head of the New Yorker's fact-checking department to fact-check their book. Okay? Again, the job of a media reporter, I would think, is not to protect and promote his colleague. And this is no innocent here, Brian Stelter. In addition to promoting and protecting Jake Tapper, Brian Stelter has been over the course of the entire Biden presidency, one of the biggest critics of those on the right and those few people like me in the independent media who tried to hold Joe Biden accountable. He's accused us of being propagandist, of celebrating cheap fakes and deep fakes. I don't understand someone whose job it is to hold the media accountable, to not hold not just his own network, but every news organization in the country who now it's clear participated in a cover-up, some because of threats, some because of a desire to help Joe Biden win. Massive cover-up. And instead of pointing out the flaws in the book, he writes he cites the favorable reviews the book has gotten from news organizations like the Washington Post and the New York Times who participated in the cover-up and whose failure was manifest. He cites the favorable reviews, and then the Twitter account for the book tweets out Brian Stelter's citations. It's nothing short of journalistic corruption, and it's missing the moment. The moment now for the Democratic Party is to acknowledge that, of course, we all saw with our own eyes, not in private meetings on C-SPAN, the public manifestations of Joe Biden's decline. We all watched as the media, not the conservative media, but what I call the dominant media, simply pretend it wasn't happening, attack those who pointed it out. And now everybody in the media say, well, we don't need to acknowledge our own failure. We'll just say Joe Biden shouldn't have run and people like Chuck Schumer should have called him out. It's a big failure. And it's missing the moment. Okay? It's missing the moment. We'll keep watching it. The book comes out next week. We're going to take a little bit of break, come back, and my colleague at Two-Way, Meghan McCain, will be here, and we'll talk more about the Jake Tapper, Alex Thompson book and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party after this brief break. Hey, everybody, tax day may have passed, but for millions of Americans, the real trouble, well, it's just getting started. If you missed that April 15th deadline or you still owe back taxes, the IRS could be ramping up enforcement. Every day you wait, well, it only makes things worse. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed daily and tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments, the IRS is applying pressure on individuals all across the country. Look, Increased administrative scrutiny means collections are moving very quickly. But there is good news. There's still time for Tax Network USA to give you a hand. If you're self-employed or you're a business owner, even if your books are a huge mess, they've got it covered. Tax Network USA specializes in cleaning up financial chaos to get you right back on track right away. Even after the deadline, you can still regain control. Your consultation is always completely free, and acting now could stop penalties, threatening letters, and surprise levies before things escalate. So call right now, 1-800-958-1000, or visit tnusa.com/nextup. All right, joining us now to continue the conversation about Joe Biden and the media and the Democrats is my friend and two-way colleague and fellow doting parent, Meghan McCain. Meghan, thank you for making time.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Mark. I'm so excited to join you. Congratulations on this new show. And this is one of my favorite topics, but I feel like I've been living it with you in real time for like over a year and a half, 2 years now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
you're
great.
you're in a unique, maybe not unique, but unusual. You and your family have a long history with the Bidens, and you and I have talked many times about how he shouldn't have run in 19 and shouldn't have run in 24, and so the whole thing is skewed by that. But in addition, you talk to a lot of normal people. It's one of the strengths of you as a commentator, and you and I know many people who saw the decline, and so that's the outside story. That's the public story. But you also know Jake Tapper. And I know you've got strong feelings about his putting his name on this book. So let's start there, since that's where I ended my monologue. What's your view of Jake Tapper's credibility in writing a book about exposing the cover-up of what happened with Joe Biden's mental acuity decline?
So I've known Jake Tapper since I was a little girl. He worked on he covered my dad's first campaign when he was a salon reporter, to just like really date in 1999, 2000. So I have been around him a really long time. And I used to really think he was a straightforward journalist. And then in the past, I think beginning of Trump era, maybe even a little bit before that, I just really put him in the basket of being a really biased, quite frankly, hack journalist that my conservative friends not only wouldn't trust, but felt like he would intentionally go out of the way to paint a negative picture of conservatives. It's hard, as you know, when you like know people in this industry and you want to maintain friendships. But he's one of those people where, for me, it took a point where I was like, I just can't really have a relationship of any kind with this person. Just because I don't feel like any of it is genuine or altruistic. And also, I don't like being a source for people that I'm not genuinely close with and feel like there's trust there. So when I found out he was writing this book, I really like Alex Thompson. I had interviewed Alex Thompson several times when he came out about his reporting about Joe Biden, right before the debate and when everyone started really realizing how bad it was. And I was really looking forward to Alex Thompson's book. And when I saw that Jake Tapper was involved or had written it or whatever, is the co-writer, I jokingly told my friend, it's like O.J. Simpson's If I Did It book. Like, I thought it was ridiculous and just, quite frankly, I think it's like journalistic malfeasance. And he's kind of, dancing a little bit right now, saying that he should have had more humility in his reporting and that he should have, known better. But there's hundreds, if not thousands, of reporters who did cover the story the right way, including you. And there's millions and millions of Americans who saw what he was unable to see. And, there's a video of him with Laura Trump, who I'm very friendly with, and she's a really lovely person, where he's just ripping her head off, talking about when she's bringing up Biden's cognitive decline. And he's basically saying that she's like, bigoted towards people with disabilities because President Biden has a stutter. And every like few months that video goes viral again. And I just think he's completely the wrong person to be doing this. I'm sure he got a big fat paycheck. I'm sure he got $6 million. And I feel like actually like physically grossed out at the idea that he's benefiting off of what you and I and so many other people were called ghouls, called, really ugly names and things for a long time, for calling out what we all could see was Biden's clear decline.
Yeah. So you and I have both spent time in newsrooms, and we understand the culture of the liberal media. CNN has defended Jake Tapper and said, he was just tough. He was super tough on this. their statements run counter to what Tapper, as you pointed out, and I mentioned last segment, is saying now, which is he could have been tougher. What do you think's happening? Let's start with CNN and then talk about NBC and other places. What do you think's happening at CNN now? Do you think they think this is a time for self-reflection, or this is just a time to help Jake sell books? How do you think they are viewing this moment?
I don't understand any of it. I also don't understand what the publisher's reasoning was. I have heard through just like gossip and media circles that the publisher thought that Alex Thompson wasn't like a big enough name to sell this book. I disagree. I think he would have been more
Yeah.
than big enough, just the content of the book.
And if it was just his book, you and I would look at it in a much different light.
100%. And I would buy it if it were just his book. And I would be like happy to interview him because I do think, he just won an award about his reporting. And I don't put him in the same category, but I do think, unfortunately, for Alex, like this is tainting his career. I used to really appreciate CNN, and I still candidly have friends who work at CNN. Like I'm friends with Essie Cupp, and she's, wonderful and I think very smart and very like a straight shooter in her commentary. But CNN became such resistance porn the past few years, and their ratings reflected that. And they can't even say like if Trump cured cancer, they would come up with some reason why he didn't do it effectively or why it was bad. And I think when you get to a point where Trump clouds your judgment and your life so much, you become a parody of yourself. And I think, unfortunately, they have. I was wondering if maybe Jake Tapper and CNN didn't realize to the degree how much the outside world views him that way. And again, as you say, like, I have friends in real life, like we all do, and they hate him. And it's not just people on the right, it's people in the center, people on the center left, because they just don't think he's a reliable person who continues to get rewarded over and over again in media like he is some kind of Edward R. Murrow figure, and it's just a fallacy.
Okay, let's talk about another place, NBC, where you and I both worked.
Mhm.
Let's say the head of NBC News
Very
calls.
bravely.
Yeah.
Very bravely.
But people there too. Let's say New York Times. Let's say the publisher or the editor of the New York Times, my college roommate Joe Kahn. Let's say he called you and he said, "Meghan, I saw you on Next Up with Mark, and totally agree. This is the moment where we need to try to restore some credibility by coming clean. What should we do? What could the New York Times do to try to restore credibility on the issue of how they covered or didn't cover Joe Biden's mental decline?"
They're neat in the same way that there's scalps on our side, where like any Republican who does the wrong thing is like, banned from all polite society. There need to be some scalps on their side too. Some people need to get fired for the work that they did during this time and completely biased reporting. I would tell them that they need to hire some legitimately conservative leading people to write their opinion columns. And then I would be like, you need to really take a reflection on the journalists who work in your newsroom, like what kind of biases they're bringing to the table. And I would have to go through it with like a fine tooth comb. But, I have a list of people in my brain that I trust and people that I would say, stay the hell. I mean, you and I both have people, maybe you don't, but I do. I have like people who work in politics and media who come to me and they're like, is this a safe person for me to talk to? Or is this person
Yeah.
going to screw me? And I'll say, they're good, they're bad, stay away from them. I mean, like, not to like spill too much tea. The Atlantic approached me about doing a profile, and I was like, I wouldn't do a profile with the Atlantic if there was like money.
They wanted you to write one, or they wanted to profile you?
They want to do an interview with me, and I just am not. What's the point? Like,
Yeah.
so I can be called like Mrs. Waterford from The Handmaid's Tale. Like, I'm just too old.
I loved your list. The other thing I would say to the New York Times is hire an outside person with credibility. Let them interview all your reporters and editors who covered the Biden administration and ask them, show them videos of Biden, talking to a dead congresswoman and exhibiting obvious decline, and say, why didn't you write more about this? Who did you ask about this? Because I've talked to some of them and some of the reporters knew full well what was going on. There was this culture that said, we're just not covering this story.
Yeah. I also think one of the things that when people ask me about newsrooms, people talk a lot about diversity, but I think diversity also means like, what area of the country are you from? Did you not go to an Ivy League school? What kind of socioeconomic background do you come from? Like, it can't just be like respectful to myself, rich Nepo babies and went to Ivy League schools who are always a lot of times when I work in newsrooms, like 50% of the time, somebody is related to somebody famous, or like their aunt is like a famous journalist, or their person's like a famous politician. And I think that's, and again, respectful to myself because a lot of my career benefited from that now. But if I were in a newsroom, I'd be like, you need to start getting people from the middle of the country, people that did not go to Ivy League schools, whatever, people that go to like, Arizona State has an incredible journalism school. Like they need to branch out and like,
Yep.
you can't cover America if you don't understand America. And 90% of the time, and again, respectful to you too. I know you went to an Ivy League school, great, like whatever. But I think that's part of the rot in this. It's like,
Yeah.
you've never been to Iowa. How can you talk about the Iowa caucus?
Right. Yeah. All right. Your dad had a close relationship with Joe Biden, although it was not perfect. I mean, I know there was conflict
Right.
between them on some things. Um, for one thing, your dad thought Joe Biden talked too much, but he was not the only one who fit in that category.
He also
And
called him Joe the
yeah.
Biden. I remember him like saying that. But they sort of like
Wait, say that again.
called him like Joe the Biden. Like
Joe
for some
Biden.
reason he thought that was so funny. He'd be like Joe the Biden. I don't know. But yeah, they were my parents actually when they met, they met in Hawaii. Joe and Jill were there and they had a very nice relationship, like, coupley for a long time, I think until politics, quite frankly, got involved. And then they sort of circled back around when my dad got sick. And
Yeah.
it's tricky for me because President Biden was lovely to me when my dad was sick. Very kind, very, like answered tough questions about brain cancer. And then, and I've told this publicly, it's not something I'm secretive about. They asked me to endorse him. His campaign approached me and asked me to endorse him at the DNC in 2020. And I said no, because I'm still a conservative Republican. And I never spoke to the Bidens again. And his staff made it very, very clear that I was dead to them and their administration and their team. And I was so shocked by the experience because it was so ugly and bizarre. And, he's like, I love everybody. I love Republicans.
Yeah.
Like, except if I
Who
won't
who
go on
who on
stage.
who on his staff issued those threats?
I will tell you offline, but
Oh, okay.
they are no longer a person that's worth. I will say they have gotten their karmic retribution that has nothing to do with me.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about that on the extra episode. And then just one more piece of the connection is your mom served in the Biden administration as
Did,
an
yeah.
ambassador, right?
My mother, who I'm very close, and I should say, like, everyone in my family is liberal except me now. Like, they all not my mom hasn't officially switched parties, but like my brother Jimmy did. And we all like love each other and subsist together. My mother ended up I actually said call my mother, and my mother ended up endorsing, which I support and appreciate. And then she worked in the Biden administration as the head of the World Food Program, and I think she still has a collegial relationship with them. I don't wanna speak for her, but I don't believe it's the same relationship it once
Yeah.
was.
Just to highlight, and then I want to ask you about the Bidens, but just to highlight what you said, like your dad was, they helped you, your family when your dad was sick. They made your mom an ambassador. The rest of the family endorsed, right? At least one of your brothers endorsed, and yet
Yeah.
when you declined to endorse because you're a Republican, they said we're dead. You're dead to them, and that is indicative of the Biden culture. You and I have heard many stories like this, and this is another myth that the press didn't cover. What a nice guy! What a lovely family! Say what you want about them; they're so nice to people, and look what they did to you. And again, I know countless stories like this.
It wasn't like, they didn't say it to me directly, but their staff did,
Yeah. Yeah,
like, at
understood.
Biden, and
So I know you've already talked about this, but I just want you to talk about how the Bidens are handling this, particularly going on your old program, The View. How do you think the Bidens are dealing with not just the Tapper book, but the general effort by the Democratic Party to blame not Kamala Harris, not the Democrats who stayed silent, but to blame Joe Biden for what happened?
I find the Biden's appearances in general just very discomforting because he, to me, doesn't look the way, he still to me looks like there's some kind of cognitive issue. And look, we all get old, God willing. I'm not an ageist person. I just think that, like, if I'm in that stage at some point in my life, I do not want to be in front of a camera. Um, I think Jill is doing herself and her family a disservice by sort of like jumping in and answering questions. He was asked, about staff saying he had cognitive decline and he shouldn't have run for president again. And she jumped in to answer the question. And I didn't watch the entire View segment, but the clips I saw, it wasn't like it was softball, but it could have even been more softball. They did ask him
I
a
agree.
question. So that was good, but I don't know what they're doing other than I'm very curious about your reporting that they're out of money. Maybe they thought that this is a way to make money like the Obamas did. I don't know. But I don't understand why they won't go away and be quiet. I think it's really important in life sometimes. After I left The View, I was very quiet for like a good 2 years. I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's good for people to miss you. It's good to do reflection on where you are in life. And like they lost in a really catastrophic way and they're leading their party into slaughter. And I just don't understand what they're doing, but I don't want to see any more interviews with them at all.
Yeah. Maybe would you watch if Jake Tapper interviewed Joe Biden now? Would you watch that?
Yeah, but that's never gonna happen. I don't think Jake Tapper would do it. Like, I just don't. And also, what's the? I was saying, I was talking to a friend about this yesterday. Like, what is the point of this book now? Everyone knows that President Biden had these, issues. They know that he wasn't fit to be president. The American public saw it with their own eyes. They didn't need journalists to tell them. They saw what they saw in the debate and made their decision. Like, I think the point now is trying to like whitewash their reputation and their experience not reporting on this. Like, that's my takeaway. Like, I don't know, and I don't know Jake Tapper anymore. Like, I haven't talked to him in an extremely long time. But my takeaway is like he is a smart man. He sees what's going on culturally, and he's probably like, oh shit, I have to be someone that like, I don't know, helps my reputation. But I'm really sick of people who, again, could not pass more judgment, could not be more ugly, could not say more disgusting things about people like me, particularly during that time, now making what I can only fathom is an enormous paycheck off of the backs of the good work of so many people, quite frankly, like you, Mark. So it's like, why don't you respectfully have a multi-million-dollar book deal? Like, why is Jake Tapper the person I'm supposed to listen to in this experience? I'm really like flabbergasted by this book and confused by it in general. And maybe I shouldn't be, but I can remember having really tough conversations with you on camera that you and I got a lot of shit for saying that Joe Biden should be president. He should drop out and his brain's clearly not functioning the way it should be. And now Jake Tapper's taking all the credit.
Amen, sister. You too can talk to Meghan McCain on the two-way platform every Tuesday and Thursday, noon Eastern time. Citizen McCain.
Monday and Wednesday.
Oh, Monday and Wednesday. Thank you for correcting me. It's bad promo if you get it wrong. Mondays and Wednesdays, noon Eastern time on two-way. Citizen McCain, join, and of course on YouTube as well. Mondays and Wednesdays. Thank you for correcting me. Meghan, thank you for making time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, after a brief interlude, we'll be back with Charlie Kirk next up. All right, now I'm going to tell you a story. It's about a fella named Leo Grillo. Leo was on a road trip and he came across a Doberman. The dog was severely underweight, clearly in a lot of trouble. So Leo rescued that Doberman and he gave him a name, Delta. Sadly, Delta was just one of many animals that needed help, which inspired Leo to do a great thing. He started Delta Rescue. It's the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary in the whole world. They've rescued thousands of dogs, cats, and horses from the wilderness, and then they provide them with great homes, shelter, love, safety, everything they could possibly need. This dedication and everlasting love to animals, well, that's Leo's mission. It's also Leo's legacy, and you can be part of it. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions from people like us. So if you want caring for these animals to be part of your legacy, speak with your estate planner, because there are tax savings and estate planning benefits too. You can be part of this. You can grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more and speak to an advisor. It's a great opportunity to do the right thing. We all call dog man's best friend. We do it for a reason. You can help those who need it most. So please, right now, visit deltarescue.org. Right now, you can learn more there. Again, that's deltarescue.org. All right, we're back on Next Up, and next up is Charlie Kirk, head of Turning Point USA, and someone who, whenever I flatter him, just maintains the same poker face you're about to see. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, trust me, you're about to miss the poker face. Charlie Kirk is an extremely kind guy, and I just heard a story from Meghan McCain about something you did for a 16-year-old young man yesterday who wants to be a cop. And I know from just knowing a lot of people who know you, you do stuff like that all the time. So kind guy, cares a lot about his family and his kids, and is a successful political and media entrepreneur. And I'm just fascinated by your success. You and I've talked about it many times, but grateful to you for making time, because part of your success is you're highly scheduled. So thank you for making time.
Well, thank you, Mark, and you are equally as generous on our program. And our audience loves you, by the way. It's always fact first, great insights, and I'll throw the praise back at you. I think you were the most interesting and important reporter of the 2024 news cycle. All these other legacy guys that have all this infrastructure, you broke 2 or 3 stories. And by the way, you called that shot of, hey, Biden is going to resign, and you just had it piece by piece, verse by verse. So you deserve a lot of credit. So I always try to throw it back and reciprocate.
I appreciate that. How do you know your audience loves me?
The emails. It's funny. We have very similar to Rush. I had the opportunity to get to know Rush quite well, and it's just a tragedy what happened there, and we miss him every day. But if you remember, he would always plug his email. Email me at lrushbo@EIB, and he would have the screen up. So in real time, he would be able to see what the audience is thinking. And I would email him sometimes, and he would respond during the break. And he would always tell me that's kind of how he keeps a pulse on what segments are working and what guests. He actually didn't do guests. That was the Rush very unique thing. So I tried to
every
adopt
so often he would.
very rarely, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, after Cruz did that filibuster, he had him on as a guest. He would have, Vice President Pence or President Donald Trump very rarely, partially because of his cochlear implants. It was hard for him to hear the guest, and it would have to be transcribed to him on the television screen. Anyway, we get lots of emails saying we love Mark Halperin, we want more Mark Halperin, and so we're going to keep on giving the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Have you and I ever talked about Rush as a broadcaster? I can't remember.
No, we haven't. No, and
Okay.
I would...
So
love
I
that.
used to listen when I would take vacations and I would drive like out west. I would arrange the rides to 3 hours to listen. And you're ideologically aligned with Rush. I stole so much from him as a broadcaster. So 3 things I loved about Rush as a broadcaster. Okay. Number 1, silence. And you do it. And I've noticed you do it, and maybe you're purposely mimicking him, but Rush would not be afraid on radio. He was not on camera for most of his career, but he would not be afraid, even on radio, to pause and be quiet.
That is
And
such a great point. It's such a great point.
Most people feel like when in front of the microphone, they have to constantly be talking. They can't have any dead air because it's kind of weird to have dead air. But I learned it from Rush, and I use it all the time. It creates drama and tension and excitement and reflectiveness. It's just pausing. Incredible. So that's number 1. Number 2,
draws the audience in. That's a great point.
And I've noticed you doing it. You do it with me. And part of it is a time to think, but it's just a great craft, a great part of the craft. Second is Rush was not afraid, to the contrary, of rustling the papers, right? You could physically hear him rustling papers. Now I'm working off of an iPad, an iPhone, and a computer, so I don't got anything to rustle, but I'm not afraid to make noise, right? Noise is good. Like open a Diet Coke, whatever it is, like the sound effects, again, human and real. And then finally, and this is something I've done in all my work, and Rush is not the only person who did this, but and when I say this to people, sometimes they laugh. Rush would only talk about things he was interested in. And the audience knows. The audience knows if you're hosting a show and you're talking about something that's not interesting.
And what I loved, first of all, you're exactly right. One of my favorite shows ever. Hilariously, it's so funny you say that. I remember I once had to drive from Denver to Steamboat, and I found the signal of Rush on the entire drive. There's something about driving in the West and listening to Rush Limbaugh that just kind of fits, right? Like the Americana landscape and listening to Rush. And he was just going on and on and on about his iPhone. It was like 30 minutes. He was talking about how he got a new iPhone, and he made it so interesting.
Yep.
Right? I mean, like, how could he was talking about all the new features and how he's in touch with Apple. And actually, Rush gave me an iPhone. He would give it to some of his friends, and he gave me many models ago an iPhone.
Yeah.
Look, I actually grew up as, quote, not a Rush baby, but I was told Rush was too much of an extremist growing up, by people around me, not by my parents. It was just kind of the vibe that he had. And right near 2011, 2012, that's when he had the big Sandra Fluck thing. You remember the whole kind of contraception drama. And it was like the number one news story in the country.
Those who don't can Google.
Right. And not even worth repeating the elements of it. But it was actually a very interesting early test case of pre-digital cancel culture with advertising. He obviously survived it and came out even stronger. But I remember I would listen to him during my lunch breaks in high school. And I was like, this guy's amazing. He's entertaining. He's deep. He's insightful. And so the best of the best, and very similar to how Joe Rogan kind of invented modern podcasting. Rush didn't invent it, but he saved the AM dial. I mean, without a doubt, the AM dial. Several major radio stations owe to Rush, their entire livelihood, because it wasn't just his show that made them money, but the morning show then got more popular, and then the drive time show got more popular, and the AM dial was decreasing in popularity. And here comes this guy, from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, who was broadcasting on like 5 stations in Sacramento and became a phenomenon. So I could talk about Rush all day long, and I love your observations there.
I'll say it is more praise for you. I've told people for years, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or journalist, whatever, if you want to be a broadcaster on audio, video, or both, go listen to Rush. Hours and hours if you haven't listened, because it's just so much to learn from. I say the same thing about you now as both a broadcaster and as a political entrepreneur. Like, if you're a Democrat and you're not studying Charlie Kirk, you're making a huge mistake, because you're doing stuff that is just like Rush. People have done stuff like it, but not exactly what you're doing. And we'll talk more about that.
For that.
We'll talk more about it. But I want to talk about kind of what's going on in the news, and something that occurred to me this morning when I was thinking about our conversation. MAGA and your place in it. When you guys mobilize, you're very effective, particularly if it's an intra-Republican fight. So Pete Hegseth's nomination is in danger. You and Tucker and others, you mobilize, and Pete Hegseth gets confirmed. And it's not just you guys, it's your understanding of the grassroots and how to use social media and mobilization. Where is MAGA on this reconciliation bill? Right now,
It's a great question.
It's the president's biggest domestic focus. There's a lot of tension, right? And a lot of issues to resolve it. And if it goes down, it's almost unimaginable if it goes down. So where is MAGA now? Are you waiting to mobilize? Are you mobilizing and I'm not seeing it? What's happening with that?
Phenomenal question. And the first answer is we first need to see how Congress treats President Trump's budget. There's some elements where I'm not even sure how the base feels. I think I know. And it's not just that I only do a poll on Twitter, like, oh, yes or no, and, to respond. I do that. But again, going back to the Rush thing, I have here in my laptop 50,000 emails a week of how the conservative grassroots feel. And so I scan them. Again, I don't respond to them all. But when I say, hey, email me freedom@charliekirk.com, what do you think about that? All of a sudden, I'm able to upload something that's far more accurate for the conservative grassroots than anything that a pollster could do. Let me break apart the parts of the reconciliation bill from the most favorable, where the base absolutely wants it to, where I think there's some murkiness or some question. No tax on tips. Very, very supportive. No tax on Social Security. I don't know if we're going to get that one if it was proposed. And then no tax on overtime. Those three in particular, the base really gravitated towards.
Yeah, but I would say not just the base, right? Who'd be against those things? Those all sound good.
Totally.
Right?
Huge,
That's easy.
very popular. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I just want to kind of go through those.
Yeah,
The,
but
other
I
element is
I think Kamala Harris endorsed some of those, right? Like,
correct.
I take
Yes. And so
I take you're right to list those first, but I'm just saying that's not getting to the problem. But keep going.
yeah, no, I'm going to get to the more sticky stuff,
yeah,
right?
okay.
The border stuff is very favorable. More border patrol agents, more border funding. Democrats would definitely oppose that, but that is like, hey, we got to get that done. Now we're getting into kind of the murky favorable, but there's going to be a little bit of tension, which is spending cuts. The base overwhelmingly wants spending cuts, but they don't want spending cuts to some of the things that actually might drive down the deficit. And that's where there's some debate. Should we get to $1 trillion defense budget? We don't know, right? Meaning, like, is that where the conservative grassroots stand? I personally think that we need to cut a lot of spending in all departments and all domains. That's going to be a real robust kind of month of, I don't want to say infighting, but back and forth of, hey, if we're serious about curtailing our debt and deficit, are we actually going to go after the Pentagon spending?
But then why aren't you mobilizing on that right now?
Well, to be fair, we're not even sure yet what the final Ways in Committee.
Well, but it's all. I understand, but it's all happening. Like the House is trying to pass a bill next week. So
True.
I'm not just asking about you and Turning Point. I'm just saying, like, these are germane right now. State and local.
Yeah,
tax
and it's an important
Medicaid.
question. No, you're right. And the best answer I have is the Hegseth thing was a very focused, very easy rallying cry, because it was a binary yes, no, proceed, do not proceed. With the bill, it starts to get a little bit murky and a little bit wonkier, and that's okay. I'm not even criticizing it. It's just a lot more in the weeds of, well, are we going to raise taxes on the wealthy or not? Now, interestingly, I could tell you that the Bannon wing of the Republican Party, of the kind of conservative movement of MAGA, is very supportive of raising taxes on, quote unquote, the wealthy, 37% to 40%. People on Capitol Hill are incredibly opposed to that idea, actually. And I have them on my show, and they say, no tax increases, no tax increases. I tend to be actually personally less ideological on it, even though, look, the podcast does very well. You'll make fun of me, Mark, but my taxes would go up fine. Okay, I shrug my shoulders. It wouldn't be like a major lifestyle inhibitor if I think we're going to get spending cuts associated with it. So I actually have a non-ideological view on that. And to be honest, like I will pay 3% more in taxes if I can go back on a college campus and tell them that we actually raise taxes on the wealthy.
Okay,
do you understand like what that would do for like that talking point would shut
you
half these kids up?
Have you taken? I apologize for not knowing. Have you taken that position strongly?
Yes, but I only the caveat is that there would be for nothing if we don't get equal spending cuts, right? If we're not going to cut spending and we're just going to raise taxes, I think that's self-defeat.
And where do you want to cut the spending besides the defense?
Well, obviously discretionary. So I think in all the departments. So the Medicaid one, I think that
like an across the board cut.
Yes. Well, I think we need to get back to pre-COVID baseline spending, right? So I think that going back to 2019 levels and saying, hey, the new COVID levels are outrageous, they're improper. That could save hundreds of billions of dollars. And then I think we need, and this is where Republicans are running to the hills on the Medicaid thing, right? And so the Medicaid, they say it's cutting Medicaid. It's really getting rid of the federal trigger cap. Again, this is very wonky for your audience, but there's essentially a trigger that if a state can only trigger the federal funds if they spend all of the state Medicaid money, then they get extra federal money.
Right.
And finally, okay, go ahead.
No, you go.
No, the one that I am mobilizing on, and this was one that is not getting a lot of attention, I think we're going to get it done, is the defunding of Planned Parenthood. Now, that one is about $800 million a year. It is not the one that is going to balance the budget, but that one is a pro-life activist and one that, honestly, Planned Parenthood from a political standpoint, forget on the health standpoint, has been very unkind to our side with advertisements, their C4. And I think it's self-defeating to fund an organization that obviously I'm ideologically against and also has been rather mean and vicious. But the point is, like, we have to pick our fights in this reconciliation package.
Right. All right. We'll come back to Planned Parenthood because I want to ask you about that. But so there's lots of other issues in the bill. And as you point out, some are very popular. But if you're serious about deficit reduction and if you're serious about the books, and if you agree with me and Steve Bannon that the politics of saying there's no magic about what the top rate is for the people who earn the most, it seems like MAGA or you could say, and the president I think would be for this based on his public statements, is say we want to make smart reductions in the Pentagon that the experts say won't hurt our security. We want to go back to pre-COVID spending levels, and so the departments will have to figure out how to accommodate that. We want to do smart things about Medicaid that don't hurt beneficiaries who shouldn't be hurt, and in part we want to fund that by allowing the top rate to rise. That's a package that I think if you support it and your allies support it and said to the president, "Is that good with you?" would happen. So why isn't that happening? And for people who say, people say this is wonky. This is like our future and our kids' future.
No, I agree. I could talk about this all day long.
Yeah. Right now that's all happening, and I think if MAGA said whatever else is in this giant bill, we want those provisions, I think he'd have a good chance to pass it, and the president would win substantively and politically.
I think that's partially correct. The president is very adamant about a $1 trillion defense budget. To be honest, I need to hear that argument. I really want to sit down and learn, and I haven't done that. And I want to hear from Pete Hegseth and hear from the president. Why do we want to get, or his team, why do you want to get to $1 trillion? Because that really is a major component.
Shouldn't you be doing that now? It's all happening now.
Yes, it is happening. But again, to be fair, this is true. I had Mark Wayne Mullen on the show and Rick Scott on the show, and they don't even half the time know all the details of what's going on. They have contradictory stuff. And so I'm trying to also get my bearings. Does that make sense? Like, okay, and they're like, well, in this committee, this is here, and there's no way we'll cut that. And so I'm trying to also find out who is the driving force of this entire thing. It's not totally clear. And I think you're right. It's going to happen gradually and then suddenly. Yeah. And I guess my answer is, why are we not mobilizing the way we do with Hegseth? Because I'm not actually as ideological on some of this stuff as I was with Pete, which was a very dramatic red line. Yeah. In fact, I want to support the president. I want what's best for the country. There are some red lines that we have as the conservative movement. For example, if we get nothing on the border, I think that would be obvious. And I don't think that's going to happen. That looks like it's going to be a pretty easy win. But then there's the other kind of the second and third issues where, right now, like Senator Johnson has come out this morning and said, I'm not going to support even the form of this reconciliation bill.
Right.
I it's like, okay. And then Rand Paul said something the same. So what are we negotiating, right? Because if they're like the structure itself, and then Rand Paul comes on my show, contrary to Rick Scott, and says, well, if it raises the debt ceiling, I'm not voting for it.
Yeah. All right.
So,
I hear you.
anyway,
Complicated. It's not as simple as a up or down confirmation vote. But I still.
But when it gets to those elements, we will be willing to mobilize on things that we preciously care about. So
when there's a final vote, say in the House, which will vote first, if the president supports the bill, will you mobilize on behalf of whatever's in it at that point?
almost certainly, unless there's things that are so adamant towards what I believe. For example, if there's like nothing for border security, if we're like expanding Medicaid funding. But again, if it's a better than not bill, almost certainly we'll mobilize for it.
And will the mobilization include what you've mobilized, the way you've mobilized before, which is if the White House says, or the press says, these are the 8 Republicans who are wavering, will you go on Twitter and say, dear Congressman so-and-so, you better vote for the president's bill or you'll pay a price the way you've done on other issues?
Well, it depends on what their contentions are. It also depends on, like, are they actually persuadable? What was unique about the Pete Hegseth, I know that's like kind of the reference point, is that, like, Joni Ernst herself was being rumored at possibly going into the DOD. There was all this other kind of subterranean drama, but it depends. It depends on what the objections will be and whether or not, any sort of influence from the right flank could actually influence some of these people. I mean, some of these moderates in New York, they love being attacked actually sometimes from the right flank when they're in cycle. I will tell you, Mark, something that we will not tolerate is if they are blaming or they're saying, well, we have the midterms coming up, so we can't take a tough vote. I think that's an outrageous thing. You just won an election. You just got political power. Use it. Right. Don't constantly be looking at the next election.
Yep. Planned Parenthood, I believe this is the case. I've covered them for a long time. Most of what they do is not perform abortions. Most of what they do is contraception, testing, including for sexually transmitted diseases. And in a lot of communities, they're the ones doing that stuff. They're providing a big part of the market. So wouldn't it be better for the country? I ask a devil's advocate here. Wouldn't it be better not to defund them, but to try to figure out a way to fund the things that are useful? Because I assume you think testing for sexually transmitted diseases and
sure. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to contend that.
Yeah. So
well, yeah,
you'd really do
personally
damage
with birth control is a separate issue. Yeah, access to I'm not going to fight on access to contraceptions. Yeah.
So isn't it a mistake for the country, not take the politics out of it, to try to put them out of business?
No, I mean, and I would say that we could reallocate that money to other community health centers that don't perform abortions at all. I don't want to get too deep into this, but there is evidence to show that if a woman will go to Planned Parenthood for contraception, she will develop a relationship and then be more likely then to be part of the quote unquote business flow that could lead towards abortion. There is also an argument, and to be honest, I've heard it and I need to prove it more, but I believe it just intuitively, I should say, that it helps pay the overhead of the business model that then allows Planned Parenthood to do some of the other stuff. That makes sense as someone who runs a big organization. I can see how overhead can help grind the gears there. But here's the other point is that there are other potential community health centers that do not offer abortions that could get that nearly $800 million a year.
Okay,
and
so
I think we should be open to that.
They could hypothetically, and you say you're open to it, but I would argue that anyone who's actively trying to get the money away from them shouldn't just say, in the abstract, there are other places, but to have a plan on the front end to say, okay, the San Antonio, we're going to shut down the Planned Parenthood in San Antonio. Let's find out how much of the contraception in San Antonio, how much of the testing in San Antonio is done by that office. And then say, all right, before we shut that down, let's find another place and not in the abstract say maybe there'll be another place. Let's find another place and not have any interruption in services.
Yeah, so there are 15,000, and Elizabeth Warren hates this, what's called pregnancy crisis centers, which are more pro-life outfits that do all this work. They do mammograms, they do, STD testing, they will do free gynecology visits for women. and they receive almost no federal funding. In fact, they receive almost no Medicaid. So a lot of the Planned Parenthood money is reimbursements, right? So it's reimbursements through the HHS schedule. Some of their, I think it's Title X funding is actually tied up right now, like $60 million of it under an executive order from President Trump. But more than that, look, and I don't believe some of your audience will sympathize with me on this. We believe what Planned Parenthood is doing in their primary mission statement, which is we believe the elimination of life is wrong. We don't think that our taxpayer funding should go towards that. To your point, somebody needs to go down to the specifics to reallocate that funding to other community health centers, to other pregnancy crisis centers, because there are 15,000 of them. There's no lack of the infrastructure. It's a matter of where we're actually putting that funding.
Yeah, I left out mammograms and gynecological, and I shouldn't have, because that's a big part of what they do.
It's big. I get it.
I just hope that if anyone who supports getting rid of the Planned Parenthood funding has a really granular understanding of how to avoid interruption of these other services of which they provide a lot. That's all. I just
and for look a
bad policy.
A working woman in San Antonio that wants to make sure that she doesn't have a cyst or something, right?
Yeah.
To get a ablation, not a abortion, right? We don't want to interrupt that. We, though, don't want that person to go into a Planned Parenthood business flow cycle. Again, there's just no convincing me otherwise. And let Planned Parenthood fund itself, raise its own capital, and not be able to receive federal funding for that.
Yeah. And again, whatever your view of abortion rights or life is, the country elected a pro-life president who talked a lot about this exact point. And so people shouldn't begrudge that, even if you have a principled difference on the public policy and whether there's a constitutional right or not. I want to ask you about history, because you and I haven't talked much about it, and you are a student of history. And I just want to get your sense of some of the recent presidents, and start with the Democrats. What do you admire about how Bill Clinton performed the job as president for 8 years? What's admirable or a good role model for president?
Yeah. So what makes you and I a little different with Bill Clinton is I don't remember any of it. So I'm only looking through a historical lens.
Understood.
I don't have personal experience. So you could correct me. Looking from a historical perspective, again, I'm a budget hawk. So the fact he balanced the budget, I thought was very admirable. And I think that it was good for the country. He waged war on his base on 3 major issues. He waged war, if I remember correctly, welfare reform, crime, and there was a third.
Death penalty also.
Death penalty, sure.
Yeah.
And I actually think that what he did with some of the crime bill in the 90s, although people attack it, it materially did work. It did bring down violent crime rates across the country. So I admire that. I think Democrats moving to the center is good for the country and is good for the well-being of our republic. I'm not going to get into all the personal issues of Bill Clinton. That's well documented. That's actually not that interesting to me. Everyone knows that. But I think that there is this desire in the country. Can we get a Newt Gingrich back with Bill Clinton to balance budget, cut spending, and to potentially you come together on what should be non-political issues?
Yeah. Again, I take your generously phrased point about my being older, that you're looking at this as a historical matter rather than having.
Yeah, so I'm looking purely through textbooks, basically.
Yeah, but what would you say are lessons from how the budget was balanced under Bill Clinton that might be germane now?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, it really the momentum towards the balanced budget only happened with divided government. You have to have 2 people that actually want it, and Bill Clinton wanted it, to his credit. I mean, he actually wanted a balanced budget. Number 2, I give a lot of credit to Speaker Gingrich. He ran on it. He he won back the House, I think, for Republicans for the first time in what you would know it 50 years. I mean, I think that's right. The Republicans didn't control the House for a very long time, even during Reagan.
Maybe 64 years, really.
Yeah, no, it was transformational, and Republicans didn't even know what to do with it once they got it. And it was the famous contract with America. To be honest, not living through it, I firmly believe that Bill Clinton was in a very unique spot and made some bad mistakes to try to allow China into the international trade order. There were some things he did with banks that I don't love. But generally, Bill Clinton won the presidency as a kind of blue dog Democrat, as a common sense Democrat, and was a far better fiscal steward of the country than even some Republicans over the last 20 years. And that I respect.
So maybe the best way for Donald Trump to balance the budget would be to lose the House.
No, I don't think Hakeem Jeffries is a honest broker that actually wants the balanced budget. That's the difference. Where I think Bill Clinton was.
How did Barack Obama govern as president that you found admirable?
Found admirable, boy. I could tell you first. I mean, the obvious. Let me just tell you background, and then I will try the best to answer that question. Actually, I do have an answer to that. But first, I grew up in Chicago during the Obama craze, 08, 09. So I understood the celebrity and the aura of Obama.
Yeah.
The big hope that everybody would repeat time and time again that was his greatest failing is they thought it would be a de-emphasis of racial politics, not an emphasis of racial politics. We were talking more about race at the end of the Obama presidency than at the beginning. I think that was one of his great failings. What I actually think he did well was that he could have been way more radical his last 4 years. He kind of took it easy. I'd say this as a conservative. He did not issue flurries of radical executive orders. He was in some ways so careful to not come across as like overly revolutionary as a president. And there's a lot of historians that wrote this. And again, this is going to sound like improper, but you understand what I'm saying. There were some historians that have said about Obama that he knew he was the first black president, and he took that with a lot of weight. So he didn't want to be like overly radical and overly throwing away of White House custom.
Yeah.
And for that, I actually admired. And again, I don't mean to racialize it. That was his own telling to his own inner circle, right?
Understood.
And so, yeah, I think that in that way, it was good. And then the other thing I admire that, and Republicans in Congress need to realize this, he went big. He won a mandate, and he went very big that first year. He went for health care. He went for stimulus. It cost him, but he went really big.
Yeah.
And for that, I admire.
Yeah. All right. How many words in a thought bubble would you say, approximately?
How many words are in a thought bubble?
Yeah. About.
I've never
Six.
6 or 7. Yeah.
About 6 or 7. All right. I want the Charlie Kirk thought bubbles on the following. This is the rapid round here. So just like
Here we go.
What's the thought bubble? Here we
You asked the best questions. I told my team, I said, I gotta be on my game. Mark asked the best
This
question.
would be good. This would be good. Charlie Kirk thought bubble. Marco Rubio wants to be president.
I prefer JD Vance, but Marco's great.
Okay.
I'm trying to like count my words as I say it.
I understand. Hey, we'll go with the prox. Jeanine Pirro, U.S. Attorney.
Phenomenal friend and far more qualified than the media realizes or is covered.
Is there any ally of the president who's not your friend?
Yes, but I'm not going to tell you who.
Really? Wow. Are you thinking of just like one particular person?
One or two.
One or two. Are they serving in the administration?
One of them is, yeah.
Okay. Interesting. We'll have to come back to that next episode. All right. Back to the thought bubble. 6 words. The president's team calls and said they want you to spend this weekend at Mar-a-Lago.
Thank you for the call. I have to see if I have a family conflict, but I'll do my best.
All right. And would you look for
which has actually happened before? Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. If you didn't have a family conflict, would you look forward to it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, he's the best to be around. You've spent time around him. He's a force of nature. He's got, I think, at times supernatural energy. And yeah, I mean, if I could be helpful, I will always be helpful to the president or his team.
Okay. Somebody screens your calls. Let's say, I know probably mostly you just pick up your cell phone, but somebody screening your calls and they say,
it's true. I have my own phone.
But somebody's, you hand your phone to somebody because you're doing something and they're screening it and they pick up and they say, I want the thought bubble. Hey, Charlie, it's Roger Stone.
Say, hi, Roger. How can I help you today?
All right. So would you be happy to hear from Roger?
I like Roger. I advocate for his pardon, and he's a uniquely American political figure. They do not have like Roger Stones in the Netherlands. Like there's something about him
That's true.
that I find to be dramatic and fun and unpredictable.
Yeah. Okay. You look down at your phone and there's a text from Pete Hegseth. Says, Charlie, I just can't take it anymore. I think I got to quit.
No. We work too hard. You're too good of a man. Grin and bear it. Turn off your phone for a day and keep going.
Okay.
That would be my advice.
Okay. JD Vance says, hey, Marco and I are going to the Pope's first Mass this weekend. Want to come? Thought bubble.
I will say, actually, I have to be in London to debate at Oxford, but I would actually honestly say, thank you for the invite. Hope you guys have a great time. I'm not Catholic, but please invite someone who would value it more. And I would value it a lot, but I would feel as if I'd be like stealing a seat from someone where that would be like the coolest thing in their life as kind of a cradle Catholic. I mean that like non-sarcastically. I think that a cradle Catholic would have much more reverence for that, even though I would be floored and honored as, and I love Catholics, but I think that would be
understood.
really
Okay, you look down at your phone. It's a text. Ready? It says this. Hey, Charlie, it's Kamala Harris. I got your number. I'm going to be in Phoenix, and I would love to get together.
I would say, first I'd have to verify that it's actually her number.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'd say only on camera.
Is that would be your thought bubble? I'd only do it on camera?
Correct. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Would she text back and say, I've heard a lot of great things about you. I want to compare notes and at a private dinner.
No way. I would consider her to be disingenuous. Unless there would be an intermediary that would advocate for.
Let's say,
then I would.
Had some
would
mutual.
Yes,
you would do it. And now
yes.
Would you look forward to it?
Oh, of course I would. I love learning. I learned this from Tucker. Sit down with people, even if you disagree. Ask great questions. Be curious. The only fencing I would have is if, am I being taped? Am I being recorded? Is there like another agenda? That's just typical right-wing paranoia talking. So, but if all those things were there and there was an intermediary that would advocate for, hey, this is a legit thing, like there's no games, then yeah, I would do it, of course.
Okay, couple more. You get a call and you pick up the phone rings. You don't recognize the number. It's a blocked number. You pick it up, and the person says, "This is Barack Obama, and I would like you to come to Chicago and speak to a group of young student leaders."
Yes, happy to. Absolutely.
Happy to. You would do that.
Yeah, of course. I'll speak. I mean, honestly, I'd love to meet Obama. I'm not like a fan of his, but I
never met him.
I have a whole. No, I haven't. No, I've seen him. I saw him at the inauguration, which was actually the first time I ever saw him in person. And I would love to privately figure out. I have a theory he's not actually as radical as the current left wing of his party is.
That's accurate.
And I want to confirm that. I want to kind of feel out what drives him. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd meet him. And I think that if he wants me to speak to a bunch of students, I'll speak to, any students. We could maybe speak at the Obama Library if it ever gets finished.
Yeah. How late do you typically stay up?
Not too late, actually. 10:30.
And do you ever wake up in the middle of the night, go to the kitchen and eat?
Rarely.
Rarely. Okay. You wake up in the middle of the night and you're hungry and you go to the kitchen. What's your thought bubble?
My thought bubble is a banana or almond butter. That puts you right to sleep. Banana's full of tryptophan. So
it's true. All right, last thought bubble, and then we're done. Your accountant says open your email. Your tax returns there, and how much you owe is in there. What's your thought bubble?
Well, gotta pay it.
Yeah.
I pay my taxes, so
that's good. That's good as an American
citizen. I pay quarterly.
Does Arizona have an income tax? I can't remember.
Yeah, we do. It's not terrible. It's like 3.7%, but
yeah,
it's the cost of paradise.
Understood. Grateful to you for making time, and love having you on, and love being on with you. And I hope next time your producers say, "Hey, Halperin wants you back on," your thought bubble will be absolutely.
You ask the best questions. I love it because you challenge me. It's provocative in a good way, right? It gets towards things that I would not usually be asked, but in a very respectful and insightful way. So thank you.
Very grateful to you. Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll talk.
Thanks, Stan. See you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. So that was Charlie Kirk. I appreciate him being on. Great talking to Meghan McCain. And again, very grateful to you all for being part of Next Up. You can watch this show on YouTube, or you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, recommend, all those other things. And we'll see you next week with more Next Up.